Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Well, we have a very interesting combination. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking with Paul Burley about the ancient archaeological site of StoneHenge. And then we're totally switching gears in the second hour, speaking to Brandy Herr about the ghosts of Granbury. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healing, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, a problem at work, a problem in your relationship, a problem with your health, give me a call, drop me a note, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation by phone, in person, and even via Skype. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their 50-page free Jumpstart Your Intuition Guide. To do that, just go to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. If you've missed an episode of Just Energy Radio, please do go to our website, www.justenergyradio.com. You can access over 7 years of show archives, or you can visit our channel on YouTube, Just Energy Radio, and listen to the archives there. If you do go, please subscribe to our channel. A couple of quick announcements. Next weekend, there is the Granbury Paranormal Expo being held by our second hour guest, Brandy Herr. It's going to be a really fun event. So if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, come down to Granbury and check out the action. It really is fun. It's great atmosphere. Lots of good people. August 16th, I'll be in Collinsville, Illinois at the Ancient Mysteries International Conference. And then September 6th in Galveston, Texas, the Dash Beardley Wake the Dead Conference. To get information about all of these events, go to the Soul Healer webpage, or just go to any of my web pages and you can get further information. Okay, all the business is done. So let's get our first guest on, Paul Burley. Paul Burley is an engineer and environmental geologist who has researched world mythology, pictographic and architectural symbolism, and sacred landscapes expressing spiritual traditions around the world. His journey to understand the meaning of Native American medicine wheels led him to study sacred symbolism exhibited by cultures over tens of thousands of years. His analysis of that symbolism has resulted in new understandings of the sacred lifeway of ancient and indigenous peoples. He is the author of the book, and I didn't write this down, StoneHenge, Above and Beyond. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio. His webpage is pauldburley.com. Paul Burley. Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself tonight?
I am wonderful. Paul, where are you? Where do you call home? Because I kind of thought that you were, across the pond somewhere, but you don't have an across the pond accent.
I came to England about 5 weeks ago from Minnesota, and I'm an American. Grew up in Canada, back to the States, and happened to write this book that came out on March 28th. And it's so radical in its content and conclusions, I decided to move over here for 6 months through September so I can make my case, present my findings, and if archaeologists have any questions, I'd be glad to meet with them face to face and talk about it.
Well, how fun is that? 6 months in the UK. I think I could do that.
It's expensive, I'll tell you that.
So how did you become interested in Stonehenge and mythology and ancient symbolism in the first place?
Well, back in 2003, I encountered a Native American medicine wheel at an elevation of over 10,000 feet in Wyoming, which was really curious because these medicine wheels made of cobbles and different stones have never been encountered at that elevation before. And I was curious about the symbolism, the circle and the lines and this cairn of stones that was in the middle. And ultimately, I did determine what the purpose of the symbolism as a wheel meant. And it ultimately led to realizing that all sacred circular symbols around the world and throughout time are all representing a three-dimensional structure or a spherical structure. And all of these circular structures geometrically are two-dimensional facets, geometrically now, of this spherical structure. And from that, I decided that an excellent example of that type of symbolism would be Stonehenge.
I mean, that's a really interesting point. You know, what it brings to mind in me is, you know, when you talk about, you know, subtle energy things, you talk about the aura, you know, it's represented as the sphere around you, but it also is represented as that circle. Well, 3 circles encircling the body, you know, front to back, side to side, and then around your center to make the dimensions of a sphere. So I think that that's interesting where you came from, your opinion, you know, and then there are these other opinions that support that notion. But why Stonehenge? Because that's kind of 3-dimensional and not really, I mean, it's circular in diameter, but not circular, you know, top to bottom. Or was it at one point in time?
The henge, and henges are only found in Britain. Henges are the circular ditch and bank that surrounds the megaliths of Stonehenge. So there are many, many, many henges here, but they were all circular or approximately a circle. Depends on how hard these people worked at creating them. So Stonehenge is virtually a perfect circle. So that is the henge, just that circular part on the ground surface. The interesting thing about Stonehenge is that there's a structure within the henge, and that is these megaliths that form other circles and a horseshoe shape. The trilithons, the really tall ones in the middle, form more of a horseshoe shape than a circle. But generally, it's a circular structure, circles within circles. And so it's representing spheres within spheres, and that's a key recognition geometrically for Stonehenge, but it goes much deeper than that.
Okay, and that's where we're going to be heading. So let's kind of back up a little bit, and you know, for the sake of setting the stage, perhaps we can start with maybe a brief history of the British Islands in relationship to the megalithic or Neolithic construction found in the country.
Sure. Well, most of the British Islands were covered by ice during the last ice age, which ended about 10,000 years ago. The area of Stonehenge was not covered by ice, though. So it's possible that people were living back then in the southern part of Britain.
Okay, I think we have just lost Paul. So, I don't know, everybody, it's just you and me. Sometimes it's really hard to tell if, you know, I'm just not hearing the guest. Yeah, we lost the guest. So if anybody has any questions about Stonehenge or anything, please do put them into the chat room, and I would love to answer them. But I think, Stonehenge, there are so many theories about how it was built. I mean, that structure is probably one of the other places on the earth, like the pyramids in Egypt, that they have so many ideas. Well, maybe not so many ideas about how it was built, but no one can really figure it out. No one can really figure out how on the top of those upright pillars, the stones, how they could carve these little bumps that stick out, and then on the other piece that goes across the top, put a little hole in it so that when you put the two stones together, that they kind of lock in place. I mean, how would you figure that out? It flabbergasted me. And then to lift them into place at a period of time before they had the wheel, before they had pulleys, and anything else like that. Okay, so we're still having some technical problems with Paul, and so we might be switching things up here pretty quick. We're going to give Paul one more try, and if that doesn't happen, we can't get him back, which totally sucks because I thought this was going to be a really cool interview. We're going to bring on our second hour guest, Miss Brandy Hare. So hang on, everybody, but I'll just kind of keep on talking. But it is interesting that... So we got a question from Fringe Radio. Is it true that there are certain times of years that visitors are not allowed to view the monument? Fringe, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not really sure. I mean, one, I would think it would be very challenging to make it so that you couldn't view it. It is kind of huge. I know that there are times where you can't go onto the property, but I'm not really aware of periods of time where you can't look at it, from a distance at that. But why they would keep you from going onto it, we can only speculate. Is it, some government thing? Anyway, I don't really know. So, Fringe, don't really know. Wish I did. Okay, so we're just going to give them a couple more seconds to... That's what I heard. You cannot get close to it. But why they won't let you get close to it is a mystery at best. We could always go to, one of the things that I thought for a very long time was that Stonehenge was actually like some kind of a transporter site or some kind of a site where extraterrestrials would go to. And so maybe there's some kind of an alliance, and some kind of an energy thing happening there that the government is aware of, and they keep, people from going there because they're doing their experiments or there's actually something going on. I mean, and that was kind of my knee-jerk reaction in looking at Stonehenge in the first place, was that it was some kind of, platform or something. So, we may have Paul back.
Yeah, I'm here. The stones are important for Stonehenge once you realize that this circle is representing a sphere, because the sphere, the upper part of the sphere then is the cosmic dome, and the lower part of the sphere is the earth itself. And that's key to understanding not only Stonehenge, but the landscape that surrounds it. And at the middle of these two hemispheres then is an equator, or the land surface where the cosmos meets the earth, right on the land surface that we're walking on. And that's what is being defined by that circle as well. So everything that's constructed on the earth then is representing life on earth. So the stones were built to represent that life symbolically, created by human beings, to show that we understood where life comes from and where it returns. That's really the basic idea of the symbolism going on at Stonehenge as far as those large megaliths go.
And so is there the same kind of interpretation? You were talking earlier about this Native American stone circles. I mean, is that a similar interpretation of the stone circles as well, even though obviously on a much different kind of scale?
That's exactly right. Virtually every time you see a circle made, whether it's drawn or made with sand paintings, mandalas, that type of thing, or henges, or in the case of Native Americans, these circles made of cobbles and boulders. When you see that circle, it's representing a sphere, and that sphere is representing the earth, the world, the universe, the sphere around each individual. In other words, everything in the universe and one's self, all as one entity. And everything that is the universe is within me, and I'm within everything in the universe. That is the idea that these cultures are relaying through this symbolism. So wherever you find those circles, it's representing these same sacred relationships between a person and another person, a person and the earth, that person and the cosmos, or that person and the creator, however the culture was envisioning this creator. Those are the four important sacred relationships that these circles are representing.
I think it's interesting that, when you speak from a more metaphysical, spiritual point of view, that is kind of the basic premise. But when you look at society today, that's really not where we're at. Everything is about I, me, and separation. Not unity that you're describing and you're saying is represented by the circle form.
That's right. Whether it's a major religion or paganism, aside of Christianity, virtually all other religions and sacred lifeways understand the circle as representing a sphere or the world or the universe. And it is worldwide. But what happened with Christianity coming along is that type of symbolism was hidden or set back, was not important for the Christian culture and the Holy Roman Empire. And so we've kind of lost that symbolism in Western society, Western cultures. But the rest of the world has not. The rest of the world understands this symbolism. And so I think now it's just a matter of us catching up.
Or figuring out what we've lost, but I'm not going to go on that tangent because we have a whole bunch of other stuff to talk about other than, politics. But
right.
So one of the things that you talk about in your book that I have never, ever heard of, and I'm hoping I'm saying this right, is the curses.
Curses, yes.
Okay. What are they? And what were they used for?
Well, a cursus is a linear feature. There are about 100 of them found in the UK and Ireland. Most of them are in Britain, meaning Wales, Scotland, and England. And they were generally built before StoneHenge. So we're looking back at about 3,000 to 3,500 BC, about 500 to 1,000 years before StoneHenge was constructed, or the stones were placed at StoneHenge. So there is a greater cursus called the Greater Cursus at StoneHenge. It's about 800 meters north of StoneHenge.
Okay.
And
there you are.
Yeah, I'm here. And this cursus is about 1.7 miles long, about almost 10,000 feet long, and it's about a football field to a football field and a half wide. It is huge, and it's the largest symbol that is out there in the Stonehenge landscape. And very few people recognize it. People go to see the stones at Stonehenge, but this linear feature that's so large is you only notice it because there's a very shallow ditch and bank that encircles it, just like Stonehenge. But rather than a circle, it's a big, long, very long feature, 0.7 miles long. Well, that is a cursus, and cursuses are found in different shapes. They may wind their way through forests and the agricultural lands here, and some of them are straight. They all have different sizes, but the one at Stonehenge is sort of the archetypal type of cursus. So that's important because a cursus being built back in 3500 BC this cursus appears to be the very first monument or structure of a sacred nature constructed on the Stonehenge landscape.
When you think about, these rectangular or oversized stone, well, it's not even stone landworks, I guess it would be considered. The first thing that comes to my mind is Nazca. I mean, would you kind of put it into a similar category as the work that you see there? I mean, obviously you're not identifying any animals, although they do have, the giant horse there. So maybe we are talking about a kind of similar feature that you find in South America.
Well, they are both the cursus and what you find at Nazca. They are very long, straight features. To what degree the Nazca lines are associated with what I found the cursus at Stonehenge to mean, I don't know. I'd be curious if that was indeed the case, but it's possible. But certainly these are very long, straight features, and there is something behind them being constructed as large as they are and oriented in a particular direction. Certainly that's the case of the greater cursus at Stonehenge.
Okay, I'm going to throw a question. We're getting a lot of questions from the chat room, but we have a lot of material to cover in a very short time. And this is from Fringe Radio. Paul, your thoughts on Stonehenge being a portal into parallel worlds? Some believe that the Druids weren't exterminated by the Romans, but that they simply escaped to another dimension with the help of Stonehenge.
Well, first of all, I would say one of my favorite sayings is, anything is possible, few things are probable, and ultimately only one event happens over time in a particular situation. So anything's possible. It's possible that the Druids were able to teleport away, but then the question is, what's the evidence? There's no evidence of it, no physical evidence of it. So I tend to look at the wheat being where we have evidence, and the chaff is lack of evidence. So we want to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, and all of the wheat that we collect is then good evidence that we can use to solve issues in science. So I can't say that some of these theories regarding the Celts and Stonehenge as some type of a portal isn't the case. I don't know. I haven't seen evidence directly to show it's that's the case. But if other people believe that to their heart, that's fine. But I don't see the evidence for it. What I see at Stonehenge is that it's the symbolism created by people to demonstrate their connection with the earth and the cosmos, and that they are a part of everything, and they are a part of life throughout the universe. That's a key component of Stonehenge. Beyond that, evidence to show otherwise is few and far between.
Good answer. So we were talking about the curses, and when you evaluate the curses, do they form any kind of relationship to the other sites in the area?
Well, other than the cursus, there are a number of other features built at about the same time, and they are long barrows. They are, instead of a round mound of soil, such as Native American barrows or mounds. Back in 3500 BC, there were long barrows that were constructed. So they're a linear feature. They're several tens to several hundred feet long, and there are a couple dozen of them on the Stonehenge landscape. It turns out back in the 1990s, Professor Terence Meaden discovered that 9 of these long barrows are oriented so that their alignment is directed straight through one end or the other of the cursus. So there's obviously some type of a reason for that being done, and it introduces the idea of geometry being important on the landscape for where these different monuments and mounds were being placed relative to the cursus. That was the first time that there was any recognition that there was any relationship at all between any of the monuments out there. And, there are 300 to 400 monuments within a couple miles of Stonehenge. So there are many of them, but they all just seem to be laid out there haphazard. So by the 1990s, archaeologists were realizing that there was a relationship geometrically, and it indicated that there was a relationship between people in that picture, and that was important to them to the point where they started laying out specific points around the cursus where these long barrows would be placed. After that point, archaeologists have been looking at why that's the case and looking for these alignments from a long barrow through the end of a cursus and looking towards the horizon as being the answer. In other words, there must be a star rising or setting at the horizon that these features are directed towards, but they have never been able to find any consistent answer to why these 9 or 10 long barrels are pointed through the cursus and towards some figure along the horizon. What I discovered is the feature that is being pointed out is not on the horizon. It's above the horizon. We have to be looking up into the sky to discover what these people were constructing on the landscape in 3500 BC.
So it sounds like by kind of examining the structures, in total on the plain, you or other research have kind of like, and I'm going to say reverse engineered, so to speak, perhaps a message or a thought of the original builders?
That's exactly it. If we can understand what is constructed on the ground surface there, then we might have an indication of not only what the purpose of each of these monuments was, but how they relate to each other, and ultimately what the intent of the people was for moving many thousand tons of stone and soil to create this landscape out there over many hundreds of years. It was quite an undertaking, and it's something that we wouldn't even think of trying to do with our hands today, but it was done 5,500 years ago. So there's some method to the madness. They were placing monuments in particular locations, and I call it the grand plan. They had a plan in mind that they carried out, were very successful at, and if you pay attention to the geometry, you can solve the problem of what was being mapped out on the surface.
And the answer to the question would be, what were they mapping out?
Interestingly,
boy, that's like a good cliffhanger.
We're looking back at the Neolithic. Neolithic cultures. These are cultures that are just beginning to use agriculture, and they're not hunter-gatherers anymore. And Neolithic cultures around the world and throughout time, including Native Americans, tribes that were living a Neolithic lifestyle, even 150 years ago, classify in this. Neolithic cultures paid attention to the stars, and they make that very evident in their mythology and also their structures, their architecture. And the 3 pyramids at Giza, including the Great Pyramid, is a great example of that because they have been found to be placed such that they represent the 3 stars of Orion. Well, at Stonehenge, what was being constructed was not only the belt of Orion, the center star of that belt being Stonehenge, but the greater cursus, this long feature, almost 10,000 feet long, represents the Milky Way. And these other monuments, including the long barrows and other henges, ultimately were placed because what the intent was to construct what is referred to as the winter hexagon on the ground surface. And the winter hexagon is a oval area or hexagonal area in the sky that includes Orion. It includes a portion of the Milky Way between the stars Sirius and Capella, and it also includes the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun. So the sun is passing through this winter hexagon. And if you look up in the sky in December, January at about 8 p.m., you'll clearly see the winter hexagon if you can find Orion. Suddenly these 6 stars, including Sirius, which is the brightest star in the sky, will become very apparent. Well, Neolithic cultures looked at that part of the sky and recognized that as being the source of the spirit. And it was also where the spirit returned to after a living being died. So that's represented in the Egyptian culture, by the ancient Egyptian culture, by the pharaoh. Upon dying, his body is placed in his tomb or in a pyramid, and his spirit, if you will, was free then to leave the pyramid and go to the Duat, or turns out that this, where the spirit is going back to, is Orion. Orion being representative of the greatest of the gods for the Egyptians, Osiris. So this is the idea that appears to have been going on around the world and throughout time, if you were living in a Neolithic culture, that this winter hexagon and Orion specifically is where the source of spirit, the source of life, comes from. So that source comes down along a spirit path or spirit road, which is the Milky Way between Capella and Sirius. And so the spirit comes down onto Earth, joins with the body, which is created by Mother Earth. So you have the physical and the metaphysical. They join together, and you have the creation of life on Earth. And when the body dies, ceremonies, rituals would have been conducted at StoneHenge, for example, and the body was then interred back to Mother Earth, where the body, those elements came from. Well, what happens to the spirit? That's a big question, because archaeologists aren't paying attention to that at all and are concluding that StoneHenge is the domain of the dead, because they find, parts of bodies, bones and ash there. But they don't consider that all religions, all sacred lifeways throughout time are not concerned with death but life. They all relate the idea of the cycle of life: birth, life, death, and rebirth. So in the case at StoneHenge, by creating the part of the cosmos that represents where the source comes, returns to, what they are saying is we return the body to Earth, and we create that pathway on Earth to allow the spirit to return back to where it came from, back to where Osiris is. This is what was being created 5,500 years ago in a massive scale on Salisbury Plain, with StoneHenge and the Cursuses and the Long Barrows and so forth. And this is the oldest of such features on Earth, unrecognized until now, and me bringing this forth in my book, StoneHenge as Above, So Below. So what these people were believing in 1,000 years before the pyramids were constructed was very similar to what the ancient Egyptians were believing, very similar to the Sumerians back in the Middle East before the Egyptian culture, very similar to Native Americans, very similar to the Mayans and the Inca. And you can go on and on with Neolithic cultures throughout time and around the world, all recognizing this spirit path as being the source of life that joins with the body, meaning the earth. So if we go back to StoneHenge now you can see why it's representing the universe, with that circle representing a sphere, the upper part being the cosmic dome, the lower part being a Mother Earth, joining together, creating one. And, of course, many people are familiar with StoneHenge and June 21st, the summer solstice, where the sunlight enters into the center of StoneHenge. That is the conception of life then. That is the conception of the sun, who will then be bringing life forth on Earth in tandem with Mother Earth in the springtime. By fall, he becomes the old king. He is sacrificed, and you have that another new son conceived on June 21st, who then will become the the sky god for the coming spring and new life on Earth. So you can see that there's this annual cycle going on, and it involves the cosmos and the Earth and the life that is found on the surface of Earth. That is really the big story that's going on with Stonehenge and its landscape, and the archaeologists just have not been able to recognize this because they're not looking at the spirituality. They're not looking at the basic reasons for religion at all. All that they've been concentrating on and deciding Stonehenge was about was death, and that's just simply not the case.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw one out there. I don't know how you feel about the whole concept of ancient aliens, but that's where I'm heading. Just for at least one question, because there are countless myths that talk about or make reference to Orion, or make reference to Sirius, or make reference to the Pleiades. And one of the things that I have come to believe, and not that it's locked in stone, but I have come to believe is that, our ancestors looked to these constellations because that's where they were told the gods came from. And so in order to be with God, when you die, because that's where heaven is, where the gods live, that is the place that you would go. And perhaps we venerate those constellations because that's where these extraterrestrials came from in the first place.
Well, we have those understandings because they were brought forth many thousands of years ago in the understanding of this cross of the Milky Way and the ecliptic at Orion's hand, being that source of life, the source of spirit, and it involves Sirius to a very great degree. So we have this basis of the story, the mythology being developed a long, long time ago. Now today it's being reinterpreted for different reasons as still involving Sirius, that part of the sky. But there are other understandings or beliefs that are being added onto that. I don't have a problem with that. I could consider the spirit being an alien since it's coming from outside of the Earth, and people look at other ideas for aliens and the source of life and Sirius. Again, anything's possible. So I'm not disagreeing with it at all. It's just not something that I've been delving into, researching, finding evidence for. Someday I will look into those types of things, but really the reason why I was looking at Stonehenge is just to demonstrate that this is a circle representing a sphere, and basically that's it, that it's a good example of that. But you can see that it just turned right over on me, and I had a lot of aha moments as I was doing my analysis. I didn't expect to find what I did in terms of the winter hexagon and Orion being placed onto the ground surface around Salisbury Plain. But when I saw it, it was like you did. You knew there was a pattern there. There was something going on, and it was plainly the winter hexagon. Once I got to that point, I said, well, that's the winter hexagon. And then suddenly Orion was falling right into place. There's another long barrel that is about 1,000 feet to the west of Stonehenge, and it plots exactly where the Orion Nebula would plot in space. And the Orion Nebula is the very bright spot of Orion's sword that is hanging down off of his belt. So there are other barrows, other monuments that are related to this laying out of the cosmos on Salisbury Plain. Once the archaeologists can recognize these things and accept that there was spirituality involved, I think that they'll be able to move far, far ahead in understanding these people, what their intent was, what their beliefs were, how spirituality played a part in everything that they were doing, very much like Native American cultures.
Well, and I think that the parallels that we find around the world in indigenous cultures, that at this point in time, we need to just say this is early culture, and we need to apply, the basic rules and premises that they have to any indigenous culture, regardless of where they are. Because I think there's been enough evidence unearthed, archaeologically and culturally to show, the overwhelming numbers of parallels around the world.
That's right. It comes up time and again throughout history from around the earth. And what I would suggest is these people obviously were devoted to constructing these massive structures that we still don't know how they were able to accomplish them. They had great will to accomplish what they did. And they were constructing sacred structures. Now, sacred structures are related to these four relationships I was talking about with a human being, with other human beings, the earth, the cosmos, and the creator. And because these are sacred places that are defined by the circle or other structures like the large cursus, people are not to enter those spaces. These are spaces that are sacred, set apart, and represent something that is very fundamental to the universe and related to our lives. And people are not to enter those spaces unless it's very specific reasons and certain people going in there. But that is the reason why they were constructing them, and I believe that we should hold these structures as sacred and use them and appreciate them as they were originally intended to be used. I don't think we should be I consider it a desecration if we're doing things that are in contrast to what the people were constructing these for so many thousands of years ago. That means that during the summer solstice, I believe that we should not be within the henge watching the sun come up while we're standing in the middle of Stonehenge, because we are then interfering with the conception of the sun happening at that time, because instead of the sun's energy reaching the middle of Stonehenge for that conception, instead it's hitting everybody's eyes and preventing that energy from entering into Stonehenge. Now, that's my personal belief, and I believe that was the original intent of Stonehenge. Now, that may have changed, may have evolved over time, and it's possible that Stonehenge was later used in a manner where people were inside the henge. Again, there's no evidence for that, but if people believe that and want to be inside of Stonehenge on June 21st, I'll be the last person to stop people from doing that. But I think when we recognize what these structures were actually for, as I've discovered it and shown in my book, that we will tend to have more reverence, more acceptance, more realization of the sacredness of these structures, and not want to get in there and desecrate them simply by even just crossing the henge, crossing the ditch, and entering into the confines of the henge.
Well, I mean, and like other sacred sites in antiquity, that job was reserved for the priests and, a very select group of people, not the general public if you pay $25 for your admission ticket. But we're getting short on time, so I want to ask, at least one more question. So with the discovery that you've made on the Salisbury Plain with the reflection of the sky on Earth, do you have any thoughts or any plans to kind of take what you've uncovered and look at what's going on in Egypt to see if you can find other temple structures in Egypt that parallel, because you obviously have the Belt of Orion stars identified, because that's pretty, given. But have you thought about looking at that geographic area to see if you can find a parallel situation?
Yeah, I have thought about it. That's as far as I've taken it. But I believe it's very possible. Again, anything's possible. But having found this here in Britain, it wouldn't be surprising to find it around the Earth. And I would be very interested in looking into that. But I haven't put the time in yet. But I have found that the same structure, the same sacred structure that was being constructed geometrically on Salisbury Plain is also likely found across Britain and Ireland, constructed at the same time. New realization that hasn't been discovered before, but this is going to create a big change to and again the Neolithic across the British Isles and Ireland. It's This is so new, so radical, but I believe I will stake my life on what I've been telling you tonight, that this was the case 5,500 years ago. This is what they were constructing, and it was so important to all the people that were living in the UK and Ireland at that time, that everyone was involved in constructing these types of structures across the islands.
And you haven't found anybody else who has found, I mean, Egypt we know about, any other parallel or similar construction areas anywhere?
Nothing to this degree, and by degree I mean so many points that are specifically defined to represent particular stars, and then as a whole represent a certain part of the cosmos, which is the source of the spirit as understood by Neolithic cultures throughout time. I'm not aware of another site as old or as large that is so well defined anywhere on Earth. And that's a very important realization too. That makes Stonehenge very, very important to humanity, because this is maybe the oldest and the largest. The pyramids are large, but those three pyramids themselves don't even come close to the size that I'm talking about for the Winter Hexagon on Salisbury Plain, which entails 6 to 8 square miles, I think it is. So there may be other pyramids in Egypt that may represent certain stars, but until we find that, if that's the case, I think Stonehenge stands alone as being the most representative sacred structure on the earth that is representing this understanding of where life comes from.
You know, one of the things that I saw in your book was that there were different structures, like for Sirius and Lyra, and I'm trying to like re-envision the picture, but major stars in the different constellations. Do you happen to know if any dating has been done on those structures with relationship to the other structures regarding age?
Yeah, that's interesting, very interesting, because there is evidence of activity at Stonehenge that goes back 7,000-8,000 years or more. But the henge was only constructed in 3000 BC, which is 5,000 years ago. And there's another one of the features that is involved in the Winter Hexagon, and that's the Salisbury henge. And it's located east of Stonehenge. And activity there has been dated back to about 7,000 or more years ago. So we have a number of very important sites, key sites to this Winter Hexagon structure, where activity dates back well before the Cursus was constructed and other features were constructed on Salisbury Plain. So there was activity going on for a long, long time. So I suspect that the planning that was involved in this probably went over for a very long time. It may have mutated, evolved to the point where finally in 3500 BC, they actually constructed this Winter Hexagon to the size that they did. But many of these henges and long barrows and so forth seem to be at locations that were important for a very, very long time before ultimately the grand plan was constructed.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to know. I'm looking at the clock. I got time for one last question. Why do you think our ancestors were so fascinated with the stars and the cosmos?
Well, first of all, if we didn't have electricity, we'd be looking up at the stars 12 hours a day as well. We don't do that now. We stay inside, we've got lights on, and we've got pollution in the air and so forth, and we can't see the cosmos the way that people did thousands of years ago. But when living back then, trying to understand what was going on with stars and the sun and the planets, the moon going around the earth, and the stars changing their position over a very long period of time, relative to where they were, hundreds of years ago. They were noticing that there were changes going on. These people recognized that there was such a thing as precession, where there's a wobble in the Earth's movement, where the Earth returns back to the same position every 26,000 years in this wobble. These people recognize this, and today we don't even think about it. But they were able to calculate, formulate theories as to why these things were happening, and they expressed them in their mythologies. They expressed them in these great symbolic structures that they were creating, and believing that they and the Earth were a part of all of the cosmos. So my personal opinion is they recognized that they were a part of everything. In fact, I would go so far as to say they not only believed, but they knew that they were part of everything. They knew that everything was a part of them, that all is one and one is all. And they wanted to demonstrate this because they were living, they weren't going to Stonehenge for an hour a week and then going off and doing business, then coming back a week later and spending an hour at Stonehenge. They were living this sacred life way 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And to the point where, this is why it's so important for this structure to be constructed, because they were concentrating on these ideas all of the time.
I love it. Going for an hour a week. I got it. So, Paul, I do have a question. Your webpage, I went to paulburley.com and that didn't work. Then I went to pauldburley.com. That didn't work. So do you still have a webpage that works? Yeah,
as a matter of fact, I do, and it's pauldburley.com. However, I am in the middle of having that website melded into another website, which I'm developing for the new book, the StoneHenge book. The Paul D. Burley site was more addressing my previous book, The Sacred Sphere, which it forms the basis for what I was discussing regarding Stonehenge. So if people can sit tight for a little bit, once I've got the StoneHenge site up and running, it's going to contain the information from Paul D. Burley. So until we can get that information extracted from that site, it's not going to be up and running, but it should be back up shortly. In the meantime, I would recommend that people go to various websites. I've got a number of columns or articles on a number of sites such as Ancient Origins and so forth. And then, of course, my book's available on the internet at the normal venues for purchasing books. And people can go there to purchase the book. I tried to price these books so that they were as low of a price as I could, because I think this is so important that people realize what Stonehenge is all about, because it is a part of human culture. It is part of every human. It representing what people believed around the earth throughout time about where life is coming from and wanting to help it move along to ensure that there was life the next year. So I'm hoping that people will take advantage of that and learn about Stonehenge, learn about what it's really all about. It's not a graveyard. It's not a domain for the dead, but it is an expression of the importance of the body, the physical from the Mother Earth, and the spiritual from the cosmos, all together to create one entity. And when the body dies, the spirit does not. It simply returns back to where it came from. And it's all laid out for us to see at Stonehenge. And I would invite people, if they're interested in seeing what was constructed out there, I'd be glad to give tours if people are interested in that. I think it's that important for us to realize it. Okay, and our time is up, Paul, but I just want to let the listeners know that they can like you on Facebook, Paul D. Burley on Facebook. You have 365 likes right now. Woohoo, a whole year. And I do have a Facebook page.
Well, we need to go.
Stonehenge, as above, so below. So if people go to that page as well and like that page, they can get more information about the book there too.
All right, Paul. Well, I know the music is rolling, so we really do need to go. I really appreciated our time together, and you're fun. So we'll have to maybe come back on and talk about your Sacred Sphere book. So That's Paul Burley. Find him on Facebook, Paul D. Burley, StoneHenge, as above, so below. And we'll be back with Pranda here after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.